In June of 2037, Commander Elias Vaughn boarded the Icarus Horizon, a single-pilot reconnaissance vessel designed to reach the edge of known space. Unlike previous missions, this one wasn't about exploration in the traditional sense. It was an experiment in bending the rules of time and space, using a propulsion system that only half the engineers claimed to understand. The ship wasn't meant to return. Its sole purpose was to transmit everything it encountered. Elias had volunteered without hesitation. The launch took place from the lunar array, beyond the gravitational interference of Earth. Millions watched as the vessel slipped into artificial silence. There was no dramatic arc of flame or roar of engines, just a pulse of light and then nothing. 1 second the Icarus Horizon was docked to the relay station. The next, it was gone. For the first 22 months, transmissions came regularly. Elias's voice was calm, often philosophical. He spoke of the quiet between stars, the haunting hum of the ship's core, the way certain constellations appeared, wrong when viewed from different angles. He described strange gravitational pockets of radiation that shimmered on his sensors but never tripped the alarms. And then came the final message, a broken stream of static and a single word, arrival. After that, silence. The agencies monitoring the mission, NASA, ESA, and a handful of lesser-known black-budget programs, scrambled for weeks, trying to re-establish contact. Dozens of deep space telescopes were redirected. AI analysis of the last signal produced nothing useful. Some experts claimed it was a malfunction. Others were less certain. The telemetry suggested the ship had shifted in a way that defied known physics, if it still existed at all. Publicly, the mission was declared a tragic but inevitable failure. Elias Vaughn was posthumously honored as a pioneer of human advancement. His name was etched into memorials and school textbooks. But within classified circles, the loss was treated differently. The Icarus Horizon wasn't just missing, it had vanished cleanly, without energy trails, debris, or even gravitational echoes. In the absence of answers, theories flourished. Some believed Elias had crossed into another dimension. Others whispered that he had made contact with someone, far beyond human understanding. A few thought he'd never left at all, that the entire mission was a cover for something else, something more terrestrial and sinister. The only certainty was that no trace of him or his ship had ever been recovered. And yet, deep in the Pacific, nearly 10 years later, a signal stirred beneath the waves, low, rhythmic, and curiously familiar. The storm had rolled in fast, gray skies twisting over the Kamchatka Peninsula, waves pounding the black shoreline with unnatural rhythm. The Coast Guard patrol, already delayed by equipment failures, almost missed the man walking out of the surf. He moved slowly, barefoot, skin pale and raw from the cold. At first, they thought he was a lost fisherman or a shipwreck survivor. But his uniform, torn and faded as it was, told a different story. They found no ID on him, only the degraded remnants of a flight patch sewn into his suit. Most of the letters had worn away, but 3 stood out clearly, ICA. When they brought him in, he didn't speak. He didn't fight. He simply stared at them, his eyes clear and strangely unblinking. They tried wrapping him in thermal blankets, offering food, warmth, medical attention. He didn't seem to notice. The only time he reacted was when one of the medics touched a small metal tag embedded in the back of his neck. His hand shot up, gripped the medic's wrist with unsettling force, and whispered, "Where am I?" Back at the coastal base, his vitals defied explanation. His heart rate was perfectly steady, blood pressure ideal, but his core temperature hovered several degrees below human normal. The doctors insisted their instruments were faulty. They ran the tests again. Same results. And he hadn't aged. Not a wrinkle more than the last photo taken before launch. The same hard line of jaw, the same burn scar near his temple from a childhood accident. He looked 38. He should have been 48. They sent the scans to Moscow. From there, they were quietly forwarded to an international task group with access to pre-classified files. Within hours, confirmation came from NASA's archives. The man pulled from the sea was Commander Elias Vaughn, missing 10 years, presumed dead, and now sitting silently in a concrete room with a pulse like a metronome. Elias didn't speak again for days. When he finally did, it was only after being shown a photograph of the Icarus Horizon. He stared at it for nearly a minute, then said, "That's not what it looked like when I left." The interrogators pressed for details, but he closed up again, as if remembering it had cost him something. Later, they found him standing barefoot on the facility's observation deck, staring out over the ice-capped sea, his breath fogging the glass in long, even intervals. One of the guards swore he was murmuring numbers, 6 digits, repeating. He was quickly moved to a restricted Arctic installation. Officially, the public was told a weather anomaly had washed up debris from a lost military drone. No one questioned it. Most had forgotten Elias Vaughn's name by then. The world had moved on. But inside the Arctic facility, things were only beginning. Cameras stationed in his cell recorded hours of stillness, punctuated by sudden, inexplicable movements, blurred frames, flickers of static. Researchers noted disruptions in electrical equipment near his quarters. Lights dimmed when he walked past. Radios emitted faint clicks and tones when he spoke. And beneath the calm surface of the sea he'd emerged from, something else was stirring. Inside the Arctic Research Facility, Elias was monitored constantly, medically, psychologically, and increasingly, with a sense of quiet dread. It wasn't just that he hadn't aged. It was how he moved, how he breathed, how he watched others like he wasn't part of the same species anymore. Technicians reported an unnerving stillness about him. He could sit in the same chair for hours without shifting. Blink less than once a minute. And when he did look at you, it felt like being studied, evaluated, not by a man, but by something wearing a man's shape. The doctors were the first to notice the biological anomalies. Elias's blood carried a faint bioluminescent quality under certain wavelengths, like something deep-sea and ancient. His neural scans showed patterns of activity in regions previously thought dormant. When he was asked to undergo a full-body MRI, the machine shorted out halfway through the procedure, sparking and flooding the room with the scent of ozone. 2 technicians quit the following day, citing personal reasons. He claimed to have no memory of the missing decade, not in the way one forgets a dream, but as if those years never existed in any human framework. It's like trying to describe a 4th color, he told the lead psychologist during one of their sessions. It's not lost. It's untranslated. When pressed, he would close his eyes and whisper strings of words in an unrecognizable dialect. Phonetically analyzed, the words didn't match any known language, human or otherwise. And yet, when played back, several researchers reported experiencing vivid, shared hallucinations, visions of a night sky with no stars, metallic clouds drifting over impossible landscapes. The hallucinations weren't limited to recordings. Some staff began to experience dreams after prolonged proximity to Elias. Detailed, disturbing dreams. A chamber beneath an endless sea. Structures that pulsed with breath. Figures with no faces, but the suggestion of expression. One woman woke screaming after dreaming she had drowned, but could still hear her own voice, echoing through the water as if she were calling herself back. Elias never commented on the dreams, but he seemed aware of them. At times, he would look directly at someone who hadn't spoken a word, tilt his head slightly, and say, "You've seen the edge now, haven't you?" It wasn't said with malice. It was said with pity. After 2 weeks in containment, he began to write. At first, simple symbols in chalk on the walls. Then, complex geometric patterns, spatial diagrams that defied two-dimensional interpretation. Mathematicians were brought in and left bewildered. Some of the symbols aligned with theoretical models of quantum entanglement, time dilation, and spatial folding. Others made no sense at all. When asked what they were, Elias said, "Instructions. Or maybe warnings. I can't always tell the difference." By the end of the 3rd week, physical changes began to surface. His pupils no longer contracted in bright light. He no longer registered cold. Cameras caught him standing barefoot on the facility's open deck during a blizzard, eyes closed, skin covered in frost. He stood there for 19 minutes, unmoving. When security approached to bring him in, he turned slowly and said, "You shouldn't be this close to me." And for the first time, the staff began to wonder, was the man they recovered from the ocean really Elias Vaughn at all? Dr. Ryan Sorrell had been assigned to Elias as both observer and handler, though it was clear from the beginning that the balance of control leaned heavily in Elias's favor. Sorrell was meticulous, a man who trusted data over instinct, but even he couldn't explain the things that began to happen in the 4th week. Rooms Elias passed through would subtly shift, metallic surfaces would ripple as if reacting to a presence, and water in glasses would tilt unnaturally toward him. Instruments recorded gravitational fluctuations, too minor to alarm central systems, but consistent enough to track. Whatever had returned from space wasn't bound by Earth's physics anymore. Elias became harder to reach. Not uncooperative, just distant, detached. His speech grew slower, his pauses longer. He often looked past people rather than at them, as though sensing movement just beyond their perception. When asked what he was seeing, he responded with something that chilled even the most skeptical on staff: they drift just behind the fold. Always watching. Not waiting, listening. Despite all this, he never attempted to escape, never showed signs of aggression. That, perhaps, was the most unsettling part. It was as if he was biding time, or that he knew there was nowhere on Earth he could go where they wouldn't follow. During a late-night observation, Dr. Sorrell caught footage of Elias standing in front of a reflective surface for over an hour. His mouth moved silently the entire time, eyes locked with his own reflection, until just once, the reflection moved before he did. The dreams among the facility staff intensified. One technician gouged her palms trying to claw something out of her skin. Another was found mumbling in the hallway, repeating coordinates that led to a point in the southern Pacific Ocean, roughly the same location where Elias had emerged. The shared visions were becoming more vivid, more coherent. And for some, they didn't stop when they woke up. Elias began marking dates on the wall with lines etched into metal, not with tools, but with his nails. The dates didn't match anything in the current calendar. Not birthdays, launches, or known disasters. But when the astrophysics team ran the numbers backward, they aligned with anomalies, brief gravitational dips recorded by orbital satellites, moments where deep space probes briefly lost orientation. None had been connected before. Now, they formed a pattern. "It's not linear," Elias murmured to Dr. Sorrell one evening. "Time didn't pass for me the way it does for you. It's a field. Some of us just fall through it differently." Sorrell asked what had happened to him out there, what he'd seen. Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he drew a spiral into the condensation on the glass and said, "I left the map. And when I came back, it followed me." Whatever he had brought with him wasn't just changing him. It was spreading. They installed additional cameras in Elias's room after the spiral incident. Not just visual, but full-spectrum sensors, infrared, ultraviolet, EM field monitors. The room bristled with surveillance gear, half of it prototyped in secret labs and flown in overnight. Dr. Sorrell argued for transparency with the subject, but the administrators overruled him. "This isn't just observation anymore," they said. "It's containment." At first, the data came back clean. Elias was still, eerily so. No sudden bursts of energy, no speaking in tongues. For 2 days, it appeared as though the phenomenon had plateaued. But then they reviewed the overnight footage and found something impossible: Elias disappearing from one camera feed for exactly 43 seconds. The rest of the room remained visible. The shadows stayed consistent. The only thing missing was him. Then, just as abruptly, he reappeared in the same posture, with no evidence of movement or tampering. The timestamp hadn't skipped a single frame. The anomaly repeated the next night. This time for a full minute and a half. The technicians cross-checked the footage against every sensor: temperature, pressure, magnetism. During his absence, the room's temperature dipped below freezing, and all sound ceased. Not lowered. Ceased. Even the hum of electronics cut out. When analyzed, the audio waveform during those periods was a flat line, not silence but nothing. The kind of nothing you'd find in the vacuum between stars. They brought in outside consultants, former intelligence analysts, experts in anomaly containment, even a retired astronaut who had once shared a training module with Elias before the Icarus launch. None could explain what they saw. One consultant, a man with 20 years of surveillance experience, watched the footage and muttered, "This isn't a glitch. It's a redaction." Elias offered no explanation. When asked directly, he said, "There are places your cameras can't follow. And moments I'm not entirely here." His voice was calm, almost apologetic. "They're showing me how to fade." Soon after, the facility's mainframe began logging unauthorized logins at odd hours, accessing only files related to deep-sea mapping and satellite drift records from the early Icarus program. But every trace pointed back to the surveillance room itself. When confronted, the operators swore they hadn't touched the system. Footage of the room during the breaches showed no one entering, no terminals in use. Only the slow, constant turning of the camera toward Elias's room, without human input. Worse, it became clear that surveillance was no longer a one-way mirror. Staff started finding their own devices behaving strangely, phone screens flickering with static when Elias passed by, security badges glitching out in his proximity, private audio logs corrupted with faint whispers in a cadence too precise to be random. Dr. Sorrell, reviewing one such file in the early hours of the morning, played it backward on instinct. It spoke in his own voice. We were never the watchers. The strange events began to cluster around a single variable, sound. Dr. Sorrell first noticed it in Elias's humming, quiet, near subaudible tones he would emit while staring into corners or glass surfaces. No tune, no melody. Just a low, continuous vibration that trembled through the walls and nested deep in the bones. Recordings picked up nothing at first. But when played back through a frequency analyzer, there it was, buried below the 20 Hz threshold. Infrasound. They looped the samples through every machine in the lab, filtering and compressing, layering the tones over spectrographic data. It didn't take long for the pattern to emerge. Not random noise, but structured signal. Precise intervals. A pulse that matched the recorded fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field during Elias's absences. And more unsettling still, it matched archived anomalies logged by deep-sea listening posts near the Mariana Trench going back over 30 years. Something's using him as a conduit, said Dr. Sorrell, standing before a wall of waveforms in the audio lab. Or he's learned to transmit. The techs tried isolating the frequency and sending it through soundproof chambers, Faraday cages, even vacuum-sealed environments. But the vibration continued, sometimes appearing before they even activated the playback, as if the signal anticipated the act of listening. Soon after, staff across the facility began to experience auditory hallucinations. It started as background noise, like whispering through static, radio chatter just beyond tuning. Then came the voices. Unfamiliar. Layered. Some in languages the listeners didn't speak, others in their own voices saying things they hadn't thought. One engineer ripped his earpiece out and shouted that the walls were repeating his memories back to him. Elias didn't speak during these episodes. He would simply sit, eyes half-lidded, fingers tapping in time with some internal metronome. Always 4 taps, pause. 3 taps. Long pause. Then 5. The sequence repeated enough that someone ran the numbers and matched them to prime intervals, patterns often associated with non-randomized communication signals in SETI protocols. The project director issued a full lockdown on audio channels. Headsets were banned. Ambient sound across the facility was replaced with white noise generators. Yet the hallucinations continued, only now they came in dreams, in the half-conscious moments before waking. One security guard claimed he heard the ocean floor cracking. Another described a voice behind the clouds, asking, "Do you remember the depth?" Desperate for answers, Dr. Sorrell arranged a private session with Elias in a chamber completely isolated from the rest of the facility. No mics. No cameras. Just 2 chairs and a sound meter on the wall. The meeting lasted 18 minutes. No one knows what was said. But when Sorrell emerged, he simply wrote one sentence on the whiteboard in the observation room. The frequency isn't a message, it's a door. The coordinates decoded from Elias's tapping pattern, triangulated with the audio anomalies and satellite drift records, pointed to a section of the Pacific no vessel had legally crossed in over a decade. A region marked on old military maps as a non-navigable acoustic dead zone. Publicly, it was blamed on deep pressure anomalies and equipment failures. But deep in the Icarus archives, Dr. Sorrell found a forgotten mission report dated 9 years prior, a failed recovery attempt that ended with all crew members lost and only fragments of their submersible retrieved, scarred with heat damage, though no volcanic activity had been recorded in the area. Despite protests from the remaining command staff, a private expedition was authorized. Small crew. 1 vessel. Remote piloted descent. And Elias, insisted upon by name. He didn't argue or resist. He merely stepped aboard with the calm of someone returning home. As they approached the zone, the ship's systems began misbehaving. Navigation drifted a few degrees off course every hour. Depth readings returned impossible values, spiking, dropping, then stabilizing as if recalibrating to something deeper than the ocean floor. The sea itself grew strangely calm, glassy, as if anticipating. And always, just below the threshold of hearing, that low rhythmic pulse, the frequency, returned. The drone sub descended into the trench, tethered by a fiber-optic line transmitting high-resolution sonar and live feed. At 4,000 meters, the cameras revealed strange formations along the sea floor, geometric ridges too uniform for geology, rising like the ribs of something ancient buried under miles of silt. At 5,200 meters, they saw the source. A structure. Not built, but grown, curved and translucent, pulsing faintly in sync with the frequency. It looked like a lens, or perhaps a membrane. At its center, movement. Not mechanical. Organic. A shifting pattern like a school of bioluminescent creatures swimming in a perfect spiral. But they didn't scatter from the lights, they turned toward them. Then Elias spoke. Not through the ship's intercom. Not even aloud. Every person on the bridge heard it, inside their own heads, his voice, layered with others, deep and distant. You buried it too shallow. The lights in the command deck dimmed. The drone's tether tightened as the feed cut to black. The ocean began to vibrate. Surface readings registered rising pressure in a vertical column around the trench. Not water pressure, sound. A tower of resonance climbing out of the abyss. One of the crew collapsed, blood trailing from her ears. Another shouted that something was climbing the wave. And Elias stood at the prow of the ship, arms at his sides, eyes rolled back, skin faintly glowing with that same pulse from the deep. The membrane in the trench dilated. And the signal grew louder. The sea was no longer calm. From the moment the membrane in the trench opened, the Pacific convulsed with a violence that seemed unbound from weather. There was no storm, no lightning, no rain. But the ship rocked as if the very fabric of the ocean had been disturbed. Waves rose not from wind, but from sound. Deep, rhythmic surges that aligned with the pulsing resonance climbing out of the trench. Instruments began failing en masse. GPS vanished. Compasses spun freely. Every sensor screamed nonsense. Depths that extended past the Earth's core, temperatures colder than space. None of it should have been possible. And still, Elias stood motionless at the bow. His skin was translucent now, the veins beneath no longer red, but threaded with light. Not white, not even color as humans understood it, but shifting bands of something older, unrecordable. The ship's crew tried to restrain him when he took a step toward the edge, but the moment they touched him they recoiled, some screaming, some sobbing, some collapsing into silence. One man whispered, "It's not him anymore," over and over until he had to be sedated. Down below, the trench was no longer dark. The spiral of creatures, if that's what they were, had formed a lattice around the structure, illuminating the seabed with a light that cast no shadows. The membrane, once dormant, now pulsed open like the pupil of some enormous waking eye. And through it, the feed captured land. Not seabed. Not rock. But an entire horizon beneath the ocean floor, mountains and towers suspended in the void, inverted lightning flickering across impossible skies. Then, something stepped through. It was not a ship. Nor a being. It was shape and movement, a geometry that hurt to look at, unfolding in dimensions that refused to align. The drone feed blinked out the moment it registered the emergence, but the frequency didn't stop. It climbed. It kept climbing. And something responded. Not from the trench, but from above. Satellites around the globe began picking up matching signals. First in the Arctic shelf. Then the Indian Ocean. Then beneath the sands of the Atacama Desert. The resonance was planetary, echoing off tectonic plates, through the mantle into space. A response, delayed by eons. Elias turned to Dr. Sorrell as the sky above them began to bend. Stars dimmed. Clouds parted in spirals. And in a voice not entirely his, not entirely human, he said, "The others are waking." The sky didn't tear open. It folded. As if space itself had seams, and something vast was pulling the corners inward. What began as shimmering distortions above the Pacific grew into massive arcs of refracted light, each one pulsing in time with a signal rising from below. Satellites failed to track them, radar went blind, infrared showed nothing, and visible light blurred them into patterns that repeated with eerie perfection, like ripples across a four-dimensional lake. The ship never returned to shore. Only fragments of its transmissions made it back. Clipped logs, corrupted files, overlapping voices whispering in loops. But the message Elias delivered was unmistakable, burned into the final frame before blackout. They're not coming. They've always been here. Then the anomalies began to appear across the globe. Stone monuments long believed natural began vibrating at the same frequency. Monoliths in Siberia, basalt towers in Namibia, submerged ruins off the coast of Japan. People living near these sites began reporting strange dreams. Identical dreams. In them, they stood on a shore of black water under a bloodless sky, watching something rise that had no end. These dreamers began to group, drawn without communication. No one knew how they found each other. They simply did. Governments scrambled to respond. Martial law was declared in 14 countries. Satellites were redirected. Deep-sea cables were cut. But none of it mattered. The frequency no longer needed machines to travel. It moved through the ground. Through thought. Through memory. It was history awakening in reverse, echoes of something forgotten reaching forward to reclaim its shape. Dr. Sorrell vanished shortly after giving her final briefing. The footage shows her walking into the sea off the coast of Vancouver Island, fully clothed, whispering a single phrase over and over. It was never a signal. It was a recall. They never found her body. And still, the patterns continued. Not hostile. Not overt. But undeniable. People reported seeing figures just at the edge of their vision. Tall, slow-moving, always watching. Children began sketching spirals without being shown. Animals refused to go near water. And at night, across vast stretches of ocean, lights blinked in symmetrical grids beneath the surface, synchronized with no known current, as if cities had reawakened beneath the tides. What came from the trench did not conquer. It resumed. And humanity, for all its science and arrogance, was left with one truth too large to ignore. They had never been alone. They were never first. And now, something older remembered them.